Hello, my name is Henry Keane and we are UATV English, doing our best to deliver hard truth in easy terms for you in this comprehensive, I hope, digest of world news observed from Ukrainian perspective. Welcome to Wrap Up Weekly. Peace deal. Putin yes, Putin maybe, Putin no. What is hidden behind Russia's dictator's absence on the peace talks? Russia wants war. It attacks along all the front line, and in Sumy, 9 civilians murdered in a ferocious drone attack today. Europe is getting ready for the war by helping Ukraine. And the award for the news of the week goes to peace talks. That's right, between Ukraine and Russia on a 30-day truce that happened in Istanbul, or didn't happen. Choose your way to look at it. Putin did not arrive, sending a delegation consisting of his personal aide and some deputy ministers and some other from general staff. And it was on the request of the Russians that the United States delegation was just excluded from the process. Apparently, Russians find it embarrassing for the Americans to observe their true thug phase when they put forward absolutely inadequate demands. Due to the fact that Putin did not arrive, Ukraine also lowered the level of the delegation to ministerial level, although President Zelenskyy, as promised, arrived in Istanbul, and we managed to agree on one thing at least, and is important: a large prisoners swap, 1,000 for 1,000. The Russians, of course, rejected the 30-day ceasefire, clearly demonstrating how much they truly do not want any peace. The line was drawn on these negotiations by the Minister of Defense of Ukraine, Rustem Umerov, who headed the Ukrainian delegation.
Our first priority was people, and that's why we negotiated to free 1,000 people, and we reached to a conclusion, reached to an agreement to exchange 1,000 people. The second objective was to discuss ceasefire. We exchanged on modalities, and our teams will be working on exchanging the details. I think the next step would be that the leaders level meeting should be organized, and that would be our next step.
The pressure on the Russian Federation must continue. We should not really relax at this point, and there are many issues that can be resolved if only the leaders can meet. And given the nature of the Russian Federation, where practically every single issue that is at stake can only be resolved by President Putin, we are looking forward for having the summit sooner than later.
We do not know every single detail, of course. They were not disclosed for obvious reasons, but the only thing we know for sure is that spokesman of the Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs confirmed that the demands of the Russians were completely out of reality and unacceptable, let alone the fact that Putin had to be there, Putin and not his errand boys of unclear authority.
All of you know that this week we had a real chance to take important steps toward ending this war, if only Putin had not been afraid to come to Türkiye. I was in Ankara yesterday, and thanks for participation and hosting us, President Erdogan. And I was ready for a direct meeting with Putin, whether in Ankara or in Istanbul, and not just for a meeting, but to resolve all the important issues to my mind. But he didn't agree to anything.
So why did not Vladimir Putin arrive to Istanbul for negotiations that he himself previously demanded publicly? Fear? Well, perhaps. If it looks like a dog and sounds like a dog, So since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion in 2022, Putin has traveled abroad in extremely rare occasions compared to pre-war years. And it was a visit to either countries dependent on Russia extremely or open allies like Belarus, Kazakhstan, North Korea, China, and Central Asian countries, some of them. Things have been especially difficult for Putin after he got himself indicted with ICC, that arrest warrant issued by the International Criminal Court for abducting 20,000 of Ukrainian children. If we take into account that Turkey is a member of NATO, which Putin considers an organization hostile to Russia, then everything becomes quite crystal clear. The last time Russian dictator visited a NATO member country was 5 years ago, and it was a visit to Germany. A separate and very obvious issue is the very composition of the Russian delegation itself. Volodymyr Zelenskyy commented on that.
And you can also see that the Russian delegation that came to Istanbul is of a very low level. None of them are people who actually make decisions in Russia. Still, I send our team to Istanbul, led by Ukraine's Minister of Defense, at least to see if those Russians can actually decide anything. Our number one priority is a full, unconditional and honest ceasefire. This must happen immediately to stop the killing and create a solid basis for diplomacy.
Instead of coming personally to Istanbul and showing the world how brave he is, Putin sends Vladimir Medinsky. Instead, as the head of the Russian delegation. Well, who is Medinsky after all? Let's take a closer look. In the 90s, Medinsky was seriously involved in the advertising business. He was a co-owner of a large PR company that heavily promoted financial pyramids and tobacco. After making money, Medinsky decided to turn into politician in 1999, but little changes in his ways. He quickly becomes a prominent lobbyist for tobacco companies and a member of Russian parliament. And then, in 2012, he all of a sudden, for the public, of course, he becomes the Minister of Education of Russian Federation. It might seem obvious and very Russian way. A Minister of Education, ex-tobacco lobbyist in charge of national education. But Medinsky becomes even something way more instead. He does not promote cigarettes anymore, he becomes promoter of a long-rotted geopolitical corpse, the Soviet Union. He really gives his nostalgia a vent. He obliges Russian school children to watch Soviet films about the Second World War, issues $1 million grants to filming industry in Russia, and limits the circulation of American and European films instead. Again, it might look like he becomes an ideological censor of sorts, but that is also not the case. The only ideology behind Medinsky is money. As simple as that. It later turned out that all the fuss with filming industry was just a screen for money laundering. So a tobacco lobbyist, a fake Soviet ideologist and a thief, a perfect combination and a resume. And that is exactly when he gets appointed for Putin's aid. Whatever that means, for Medinsky such a proximity to Russian Tsar blinds him completely. He decides it is time to become a historian, no less. A serial one. Medinsky throws a series of books explaining very verbose why Ukraine and Belarus, by the way, are all parts of Mother Russia. And then he does the final gesture. He presents all these books to Putin. What a journey from a tobacco lobbyist to a private Russian Tsar's fortune teller and historian and a writer. Fear. Remember, maybe that is exactly why Putin sends Medinsky away to Istanbul, because Putin is afraid of he's going to write and present him another of his historical fiction series. Well, this way or another, Putin's fears did not go unnoticed by European leaders. At the European Political Community Summit in Tirana after the talks, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Keir Starmer, comments on this.
Supported by President Trump, the argument about an unconditional ceasefire, that Putin must come to the table for that unconditional ceasefire, and to issue, as we did last weekend, that ultimatum. Now, having issued that ultimatum, we must be prepared to follow through. Because if Russia won't come to the negotiating table, Putin must pay the price. And I think yesterday, as already been mentioned, was further evidence that Putin is not serious about peace. Russia is dragging its feet and playing games, whilst Ukraine has shown itself to be the party of peace.
And Russia attacks not only on front lines, no. The laws and habits of war are just nothing to Russians. And you can, of course, think all you want about Russia and put words into Putin's mouth and find excuses for his barbarity, like recent Trump, who was blaming Zelenskyy of a lack of will to negotiate. Zelenskyy, not Putin, who kills 9 civilians just hours ago, today in Ukraine, in Sumy. So I'm sure that Mr. Trump and all the good men, Putin understanders in the world would easily find a reason to also understand this just as well. After all, what a good man needs to do to let evil win is do nothing, right? Russia is showing its readiness for peace can be seen clearly from what is happening also on the front lines. The Russian military command is trying to assemble a large group of troops and try to capture as much territory in Ukraine, in eastern parts of it, as possible, reports CNN, citing American officials. The Russian army has stepped up its assaults in all key areas. Ukrainian military officials confirmed this. We have prepared a report about the situation on the front line for you.
Russia has launched offensives across all fronts, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy declared during a press conference in Ankara.
The main focus is indeed the Sumy direction. They had concentrated 67,000 troops there. We took corresponding steps to prevent them from consolidating, so they are working on recovering and regrouping.
The Russian army's summer offensive campaign has effectively begun, confirmed Pavlo Shamshin, spokesperson for the Kharkiv Operational Tactical Group. The situation is particularly tense around the village of Liptsy in Kharkiv region, where Russian forces are storming Ukrainian armed forces positions with tanks, other armored vehicles, and motorcycles. Near the village of Dvorechna, by the Oskil River, Russian command is transferring infantry to the right bank to attempt to expand a bridgehead toward Kupiansk. The Vovchansk direction remains a hotspot as well. Despite significant losses, the Russian army continues its assaults, attempting to break through to the administrative borders of Donetsk and Dnipropetrovsk regions. Fierce battles are ongoing in the Novopavlivka and Pokrovsk directions. The command of the Kharkiv Operational Tactical Group believes there is no basis to expect Russia to cease fire in the near future, and the Kremlin's claims of readiness for peace talks are a bluff.
I wouldn't dive into what they say on the other side. When dealing with Russians, you need to understand a few things. Russians always lie in public. If they're not lying, they're manipulating. If they're not manipulating, they're preparing to lie. We must perceive all their statements in this light. Pavlo Shamshin, spokesperson for the Kharkiv Operational Tactical Group, on the United News telethon.
Russian command plans to focus on the Pokrovsk and Lyman directions, according to military analyst Oleksandr Musienko.
Russia is already amassing tanks and armored vehicles produced at its own facilities and likely plans to showcase them in Belarus. Where there's no drone threat, equipment is relatively safer than along the front line, where Ukrainian forces have already destroyed a significant amount of enemy armor. Putin is also stalling to show the West the supposed presence of reserves in the Russian army. The goal is to create pressure and push Western partners to hint to Ukraine about the expediency of a compromise with Russia to avoid further escalation of the conflict. Oleksandr Musienko, serviceman of the Ukrainian Territorial Defense Forces, via Telegram.
The Pokrovsk direction in Donetsk region remains a priority for Russia. It is here that the invaders faced a setback in the spring and failed to break through the Ukrainian armed forces' defenses.
We see this as another stage of the Russian Federation's spring offensive, which will clearly transition into the continuation of the summer campaign. The enemy has no strategic successes, not even at the operational tactical level. Despite the intensity of the fighting in Pokrovsk, the enemy still has no advances.
In Donetsk region, the Ukrainian defense forces have improved their tactical positions in key directions.
We are holding the front and breaking the enemy at all critical points. We've reduced our losses by 15%, and in 3 key directions, we've improved our tactical positions. Our warriors gave the occupiers what they deserved. In a month, we nearly doubled the number of eliminated invaders. Serhiy Nayev, commander of the Vuhledar Tactical Group, via Telegram.
Experts believe Russian command will attempt to maximize the use of reserves in the Pokrovsk, Lyman, and Kramatorsk directions.
I would view this not so much as an advance toward Dnipropetrovsk, but as an attempt to reach the southern administrative borders of Donetsk region. Building on this, the enemy is already planning a summer campaign, trying to reach major cities in Donetsk region and engage in battles there.
However, Moscow's resources are not limitless. Russian military command is sending poorly trained recruits into assaults, disregarding colossal losses. According to analysts from the Institute for the Study of War, this is how Moscow seeks to project the image of a supposedly powerful army and exert pressure on Ukraine during negotiations. Reported by Victoria Smirnova, UATV News.
And how is Donald Trump actually doing these days? Well, actually, maybe quite well. Maybe without making too much of a noise about it, he's strangling the already choking Russian economy. Well, maybe. I'm talking about the interstate deals that he is currently sealing during his trip to Middle East. At the time when everyone was paying all their attention to the clauses of the contracts on Saudi Arabia's multi-billion-dollar purchases of weapons and aircraft, most failed to notice a subtle detail: infrastructure and raw materials agreement there. I'm not a fortune teller, no, but I can tell the fortune this time because I feel it. In the coming years, we all should be expecting an increasing flow of oil supplies from the Middle East, I believe. When I see all, I mean including Russia. And we all, including Russia, will observe a collapsing demand on the market with such an abundant supply, of course. And we all going to benefit from that, excluding Russia this time, as the Russian economy is not just based on oil prices, it is oil prices. And another issue, about 80% of Russian enterprises are facing a shortage of employees, writes The Insider. Well, why is that, I wonder? What, Russians started any criminal wars of aggression lately? Or something like that? Then why a Deputy Prime Minister of the Russian Federation, Alexander Novak, says that the Russian economy lacks 1.5 million specialists and enterprises are increasingly forced to lay off workers in large amounts? Why companies not associated with the military-industrial complex are scarce or completely drained of resources? My dear colleague Yulia Granovska investigated why is that the key sectors of the Russian economy are balancing on the brink of survival.
The recruiting portal Superjob reports that Russia is experiencing its most acute labor shortage in the manufacturing sector, with a record 90% of enterprises affected. In transport and logistics, the shortage is slightly lower at 89%. The service sector sees 88% of businesses facing a lack of personnel. In 2024, the situation also worsened in IT companies, with 87% reporting staff shortages. According to estimates by Russia's Ministry of Labor, the economy will need to attract an additional 3 million workers by 2030.
To meet our priorities in the economy, social sphere, and science, we will need to increase the number of employed individuals in 37 regions of the Russian Federation. This challenge is most significant for Moscow, Moscow region, Stavropol Krai, Rostov region, Krasnodar Krai, the Republic of Tatarstan, and Perm Krai. Anton Kotyakov, Minister of Labor and Social Protection of Russia, from a publication by The Insider.
On one hand, there is a shortage of qualified workers. On the other, mass layoffs are occurring. The reasons are manifold: tightened migration policies, insufficient funding for public sectors, and rising business loan costs. Mobilization, mass emigration, and severe EU and US sanctions in response to Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine could not but impact the Russian economy. Another significant blow to the Federation has been the fall in oil prices.
Basically, if they go up, the Russian economy goes up. If oil prices go down, the Russian economy goes down. And then we can, of course, fiddle with different measures, etc. But this is still the really fundamental mechanism of how the Russian economy works. And this, of course, then later on will be part of when we think about what should we be doing at times like this. I also want to just mention that we don't actually know all of the numbers of the Russian economy today. they are not actually publishing the same amount of data that they used to do before the full-scale invasion.
If Russian oil prices continue to decline, Russia will have to cut its budget again. Experts are certain, primarily in the social sector.
Because, of course, you can take away the pensions from the old guys and they cannot complain because it's Russia. Or you can limit how many roads you build, etc., etc. But, it comes with a very heavy price.
Since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, the EU has imposed 16 packages of restrictive measures against the aggressor state. These include personal sanctions, finance and banking, media, trade, shadow fleet, energy, and transportation. Additionally, the European Union has frozen the assets of the Central Bank of the Russian Federation. Each sanctions package includes a range of restrictive measures designed to deprive the Kremlin of resources to continue the war against Ukraine. In the near future, EU leaders plan to adopt the 17th sanctions package.
What we have to do is put more pressure on Russia so that also Russia would want peace, because we know that Ukraine already agreed to unconditional ceasefire over 50 days ago. And we also have to support Ukraine so that they can defend themselves. So what do we do for this? We are working on the 17th sanctions package, which hopefully we are ready to adopt on the next Foreign Affairs Council.
European leaders are prepared to wait for possible Ukraine-Russia talks in Turkey on May 15th before insisting on the fulfillment of U.S. President Donald Trump's promise to impose new sanctions on Moscow, according to Bloomberg. In early May, Republican Senator Lindsey Graham stated that a majority in the U.S. Senate supported a bill for new restrictions against Russia. These will be introduced if Putin continues to delay negotiations to end the war against Ukraine. This includes, among other measures, additional tariffs on countries purchasing Russian energy resources and other products, reported by Yulia Hranovska, UATV News.
Germany, with the US permission, is sending more than 200 missiles, including over 100 HIMARS rocket system rockets and around 100 for the Patriot air defense system to Ukraine. According to the New York Times, a US Congress officially finally approved the transfer on May 9th, a day of victory in Russia, by the way. Just saying.
On Friday, a congressional official said that the United States had approved Germany's transfer of 125 long-range artillery rockets and 100 Patriot air defense missiles to Ukraine. The critically needed weapons are made in the United States and cannot be exported, even if another country owns them, without American government approval. From the New York Times publication.
These long-anticipated long ranges can be launched from HIMARS systems or M270s as well, and targets up to 300 miles, about 480 kilometers away. Ukraine already received short-ranges HIMARS missiles before, but this new package includes long-range ones, which will significantly improve Ukraine's ability to strike deeper into Russia, targeting legit military targets there. French President Emmanuel Macron has confirmed that France will continue its support and will equip Ukraine militarily in the coming years. One of the key elements of this support would be the transfer of all 155mm Caesar self-propelled howitzers produced in 2025 to Ukraine. The Caesar is a powerful and modern artillery system already in use by Ukrainian forces since May 2022. It has earned praise for its speed, precision, and battlefield effectiveness. Currently, production stands at around 12 units per month, which could result in up 144 Caesars howitzers being delivered over the course of the year. The world clearly sees what Putin is, and that he is not going to stop unless stopped. This is why on May 13th in Madrid, Ukraine state defense company Ukroboronprom and German defense giant Rheinmetall have signed a new cooperation memorandum. It includes plans to set up a joint factory in Ukraine to produce artillery ammunition.
The full-scale war has proven the enormous demand for artillery shells, and the existing capacities are insufficient to fully meet this need. That's why every new ammunition plant, every new production line is critically important for supplying our forces. We must use every opportunity to build such capabilities. Ole Huliak, CEO of Ukrainian defense industry Ukroboronprom.
Ukroboronprom and Rheinmetall already have a successful history of collaboration. In 2023, the two launched a joint venture repairing damaged Western military vehicles. Its first workshop opened in June 2024, significantly speeding up repairs, helping equipment return to the front line way faster. In future, the facility will also start to produce new military equipment domestically in Ukraine. Russia is an enemy of the West, as simple as that. And this is why it acts as an enemy, increases tensions wherever it can. In Estonia, country's patrol ships tried to detain and inspect a Russian shadow fleet vessel with the name Jaguar. The vessel is under the United Kingdom sanctions. The reason for the attempt to detain it was that it was sailing without revealing the flag of the country in which she is registered. Estonian Coastal Guard ships demanded that the tanker change course and follow their instructions, but after it refused to comply, a military helicopter and a plane were raised into the air. An Estonian patrol boat approached the tanker. Then Russian Su-35 fighter jet took off from Russian territory to support its shadow fleet vessel.
Russian Federation sent a fighter jet to check the situation, and this fighter jet violated the NATO territory close to 1 minute. This is something very new. So we need to understand that Russia has officially tied and connected itself to Russian shadow fleet, and also the NATO fighter stood up and went to inspect and check the Russian fighter.
Well, with all due respect, Mr. Tsakna, I strongly disagree. It is nothing new. Against the backdrop of the ever-increasing threat from Russia, NATO is finally developing a plan to increase defense spending to 5% of GDP. Bloomberg writes about it. The alliance has already sent classified details of the plan to member governments. Defense ministers will discuss them in Brussels in early June. Kristina Dąbrowska with more details on the matter for you.
NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte is proposing a new long-term defence strategy that would significantly raise military spending by 2032. According to France 24, the plan includes major investments in infrastructure, cyber defence, border control, and continued support for Ukraine. Rutte is also pushing for internal reforms to improve how NATO operates. Analysts say this is a direct response to growing pressure from US President Donald Trump, who has demanded that NATO allies contribute more to defense.
In a bid to prevent him blowing up the alliance, NATO boss Mark Rutte has floated a proposal for allies to commit to 3.5% of direct military spending by 2032, as well as another 1.5% of broader security-related expenditure. That would hand Trump the headline figure he's demanding while giving enough wiggle room to European allies. France 24.
French President Emmanuel Macron, in an interview with TF1, emphasized that European leaders are doing everything in their power to end Russia's war in Ukraine. Europe, he said, must contain Moscow's aggression in order to prevent a potential Third World War. As part of that effort, France is open to discussing the deployment of its nuclear-capable jets in other parts of Europe, similar to how the US positions its weapons.
The Americans have bombs indeed on planes in Belgium, Germany, Italy, and Turkey. We are ready to open this discussion. I will define the parameters in a very official way in the weeks and months to come, but we have already engaged in this with the reservations that I've mentioned. That is to say, we will not finance it. This will not come at the cost of our own defense. And the final decision will always remain with the President of France and head of the armed forces.
The Telegraph has reported that France may consider placing nuclear-capable fighter jets in Germany. Meanwhile, Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk confirmed that Poland is in talks with France on President Macron's proposal to use France's nuclear deterrent as protection for European allies. On May 9th, France and Poland signed a new agreement to strengthen cooperation in defense and nuclear energy. While the agreement itself does not directly mention nuclear sharing, French media note that it could open the door to future discussions.
So this close cooperation with France is for me part of this requirement. Yes, Europe has to be able to defend itself.
The United Kingdom is also reinforcing its security measures. According to The Times, hundreds of autonomous drones will patrol British territorial waters to protect key infrastructure from possible attacks by Russian submarines. The system uses artificial intelligence to detect threats early and deter hostile action. The Royal Navy says it will help make the oceans more transparent and easier to monitor.
The Lura system, created by European defense company Helsing, uses AI to scan the seas for Russian submarines. It can even distinguish between similar types of ships based on their unique sound patterns. The system sets up a network of underwater sensors, acting like satellites below the surface. Drone gliders equipped with these sensors can patrol for months at a time, listening for suspicious activity. Published by The Times.
The technology can also detect Russian shadow fleet tankers, which Moscow uses to bypass sanctions and export oil illegally. British analysts say security at sea is becoming a serious concern, especially after recent incidents in the Baltic Sea. UK Defence Secretary John Healey recently accused Russia of espionage. He stated that Russian vessels are collecting intelligence and mapping out critical underwater infrastructure around the British Isles. Reported by Kristina Dombrovska, UATV News.
Well, that was it for this week. I'm Henry Keane and we are UATV English. Thank you so very much for being with us. We appreciate that a lot by liking, commenting and subscribing to our channel. You are joining Ukrainian side in our fight against dictatorship. Next week, we continue our work to bring the hardest of truth in easy terms for you, as we always do. See you soon and goodbye.